with demand expected to come back, the question remains, does this mean the economy is back on track?
Companies now, after experimenting with offshore in places like India, Philippines, and Poland, want to bring those jobs back.
We invest in the U.S. We're the biggest exporter in the country. In the cycle we're in right now, we're creating jobs.
From Radio America, it's Neil Asbury's Made in America, the show that explores American industry, large and small, and promotes American-made products everywhere. Put Neil Asbury's Made in America to work for you.
A very big welcome to you today. I'm your host, Neil Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, obviously, the election has very much begun. And over on the Democrat side, it seems like it's the land of freebies, right? I mean, it's socialized medicine and free health care. You don't even have to be a citizen, to get all this free stuff. And then there's just free jobs for everybody. Everybody's got to have a job. And then everybody's got to make, $15 an hour. In some localities, even much more than that. And this pesky issue of the minimum wage, it just won't go away until I don't know where it gets. But what we're seeing in places like New York City, which is a very competitive marketplace, is that they've just recently, if you have 11 or more employees, you have to increase your minimum wage to $15. And if you have 10 or fewer, you have to raise your minimum wage, I believe it is by the end of the year, to $15 an hour. But, many businesses are cutting hours. They're eliminating employees. Some are moving across the river to Jersey or even to Pennsylvania, and just to get away from a cost of doing business that they cannot afford.
Well, yeah. I mean, when you talk about raising across the board a minimum wage, a common denominator for the whole country, you're not taking into consideration that New York is a vastly different place than, let's say, Iowa, Nebraska, South Dakota, and so forth, and California being different than all of that. So it's very, very difficult to say one size fits all, sort of like socks. I've been seeing these socks ads everywhere. You got to get socks that actually fit you. Well, it doesn't always work. And there's a lot of downside to it, particularly, if you think about mom and pops and small to mid-sized corporations, a lot of McDonald's are owned by families. And the price points on that in terms of, profitability, gross profit margins are kind of, narrow. So when you start playing with a major expense for them, which is obviously employment, labor, then you could put people in dire straits. And the unintended consequences are exactly what you said. Fewer people, fewer hours, and maybe even people saying, I can't hold on to this company anymore.
And then what happens, to our young people who will never be given a chance to get a job at $15 an hour because you just can't afford, to have somebody, to do those jobs that you and I did when we were young, to get ourselves started in the workforce and to create these really good habits, holding a job, making a little money, holding on to money. I didn't do a very good job of holding on to my money, but at least I had something in my pocket. It made me feel good. We're taking that away from our young people. It's just absolutely crazy. Hey, let's continue this conversation with John Tamny. He's the director of FreedomWorks Center for Economic Freedom. He's also the author of The End of Work. The End of Work. And in this, he says that joy is rapidly replacing dread in the workplace. Well, we're going to have to talk to John about that. But first, let's talk about the minimum wage and what it's doing in New York City, in a place as big and powerful and as prosperous as New York. It's eliminating jobs. It's cutting hours. It's raising prices. The unintended consequences of free stuff. Hey, John, how are you today?
Hey, guys. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
So tell us about the minimum wage and what should we be doing with the minimum wage? Should we even have a minimum wage? I mean, should it be the market? I mean, we're a big country. It's not one size fits all, as Rich said. I mean, what's going on here? And, we're in this with this campaign now. And I don't think it's going to end. I think you're going to start seeing these candidates keep upping and upping and upping and upping to where there is just no end in sight.
Well, let's be clear that the minimum wage shouldn't just be zero. It should be less than zero. If I want to pay Jeff Bezos for the right to follow him around for months at a time and do whatever he wants so that I can learn from him, I should have the right to do that. As individuals, we have rights that presuppose government that just exist because we're free individuals. And so the very notion of a minimum wage is it's an obnoxious concept. And, Rich points out the obvious that the situation is different in Iowa versus New York. My guess is that a $15 minimum wage isn't very relevant in New York. My guess is that's probably not why businesses are folding there, because I go to McDonald's in Pennsylvania, in rural Pennsylvania, and I see that they're offering starting wages of $12. So I'm guessing in New York it's much higher than $15. And so the main thing is government shouldn't have a role here, but I would just stress that government doesn't need to have a role here. Low-paid workers are the most expensive of all. And why is that? Because they leave, because they're constantly looking for something better. And so you see Chick-fil-A in California, its starting wage is $19 an hour because it realizes that's what it costs to get the best workers. Workers will stick around. So the minimum wage is superfluous in addition to being an offense to common sense.
Well, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, why would you want to get locked into a $15 an hour wage when what you know and what you do and the value you bring to a company is so much more, and you can probably negotiate a better deal for yourself if, in fact, that job can't be filled? I mean, come on. We're told now there are 2 million more jobs out there than there are people to fill the jobs. People are looking for the right person, which is what we're talking about, to fill those jobs. So, by locking somebody in for X when they might get X plus Y, well, maybe it's not a great idea to have a minimum wage, and it really should be zero. Or, as you pointed out, John, less than zero.
Yeah, I mean, people should just we have rights as individuals that are bigger than government. And this is where I wish courts were more activist, as in they would regularly intervene and say, hey, wait a second, John Tamny's ability to pay Jeff Bezos for the right to work for him is being infringed upon. We are going to allow him to sell his labor for whatever he wants to sell it for. And so to me, that's the most important thing. But after that, you never have to worry. Sometimes people on our side say, well, because of the minimum wage, businesses are automating. Look, they would be automating no matter what. And the reason they would be automating is because it's very expensive to hire low-wage workers. The classic example is Henry Ford. He did not offer higher wages because he wanted people to buy his cars. He did that because annual turnover at Ford was 370%. It was becoming very expensive for him to underpay workers. Businesses know the value of paying up because it means you get a more loyal, more dedicated worker. They don't need this forced on them by government.
It's interesting to bring up Ford. Ford was so on the front edge of all of that, not only to give a huge wage per week to his employees, but he also provided some health care services that nobody else was doing at the time.
And also gave vacation time, which was another Ford innovation.
I hate to use this word because Neal's going to hit me. He had very progressive ideas, for the early 1900s. But you know what drives me crazy, John? When people say, well, you can't raise a family on the wages they're getting. Really?
I mean, the minimum wage. Yeah, by working at a McDonald's.
What they're getting right now at McDonald's.
Restaurant.
I mean, wait a minute. Am I supposed to raise a family? What happened to entry level? If I, worked when I was a young kid at 14, 15 with an entry level job, and I tell my dad, well, I can't raise a family on this. First, my father would hit me. And he would say, what family? What are you doing? But the point of the matter is, the definitions that we're using today seem rather strange, John.
Of course they do. And I forget the statistic, but it's a real one. The average household in which there is a minimum wage worker residing, the income in that average household is something like $55,000 a year, and that's a dated number. And all of us on this know why that's true. Generally, as you both alluded, people who are earning the minimum wage are young people. This is their first job. They're getting a start, and so they're not being forced to raise a family. Again, if you're earning the minimum wage and you have a family, that suggests there's something seriously wrong with you that goes well beyond what a business will pay you. And so, again, they're creating a problem where there isn't one. And this is certainly true in the United States. We're such a prosperous economy that businesses are paying more than the minimum wage. I mean, look at Starbucks. It's such a beautiful story. They realized they had to start off with health care, health insurance that's part of the job. Then they realized, okay, that's not enough to retain the workers we want. So now they're offering a free college education. Uber's doing the same thing. There's this popular myth, again, that I think is sometimes promoted by our side, that wages have been stagnant in the United States for the last 40 years. Oh, please. Businesses are going out of their way to raise wages every way they can because that's the only way they can retain workers.
Yeah. So, what happens to our kids though? And we only got about 30 seconds left, but the person coming in, I started like when I was like 13, 14 years old when I had my first job where they were actually taking out Social Security.
That's right. I remember that.
I get that sheet, and at 13 years old, that I don't know, I was making 80 cents an hour. I don't know. But what happens to our kids? What happened to our kids now? In New York City, are they subjected to $15 an hour? I mean, any business who wants to hire a young person, give them a little experience, they also have to pay $15 an hour for that?
Well, yeah, it's certainly unfortunate for them. There's this chance, of course, if there's no minimum wage, that you can get in on the low level. But my response to you there would be an optimistic one. I don't feel sorry for most anyone lucky enough to be a citizen of the United States. And so if you're lucky enough to be here, things are going to work out for you. There's always individual circumstances, but American children are the luckiest crop in the history of the world until the next generation of American children come along. I'll never feel sorry for them, no matter how stupid our politicians can be at times.
I just hope they find jobs, because I think that's very, very important. But hey, John, we're going to continue this. We want to talk about currency and currency manipulation. That was a big story this week. And it's, what does that do to an economy? Is it good to devalue or not to devalue? And should we worry about it or not worry about it? We're talking with John Tamny. He's the director at FreedomWorks Center for Economic Freedom. He's also the author of The End of Work. He's going to be with us. Stay with us. You don't want to miss it.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. And we're together with John Tamny from FreedomWorks and the author of The End of Work. So, John, we're going to kind of change gears here a little bit. We're going to go from minimum wage. We're going to go to currency and currency manipulation. And the president this past week has designated China as a currency manipulator. And, that's a pretty big deal because, we've seen a lot of that happen for many, many years. But, the American president has usually stepped back from that, has gotten close, but has stepped back. It's a pretty big deal that in this era of trade war, that the president now has taken that out of his arsenal and said, China, you're a currency manipulator, because once the president announced a 10% tariff on essentially the remaining imports from China, meaning that we're going to be putting a tariff on everything we import from China, the China government let its currency fall. And it broke that psychological barrier of 7 RMB to the dollar. And many people thought that once it breached 7, it would have a clear runway to 8. Or even beyond, and whatever we would do to tariff China, they would respond by letting their currency weaken to where their manufacturers would be able to give discounts to offset the tariffs, therefore nullifying the tariffs and maintaining their markets. So, what do you make of all this?
It's just a big load of nonsense. Let's say I cut my definition of the inch in half. Will either of you believe me if I tell you I'm 12 feet tall? I mean, you know the answer to that, and it's the same way with money. There's this myth out there that you can play around with money, with currency, and somehow make your goods cheaper or more competitive. The very notion is laughable. Markets pick up on this stuff. If you devalue your currency, you don't become more competitive because suddenly the cost of producing whatever it is you're producing rises. Just to use one example, the Ford 150 is one of the most American-made trucks in all of the United States, but 30% of what goes into making it comes from overseas. So you devalue the dollar, you're not more competitive. And so wait a second on that, because I'm a manufacturer myself, and think about it though. If all of the or most of, or using your example, if 70%
of the cost of making a product in China was in RMB. In other words, it wasn't based on imported inputs or imported materials or fuel costs or whatever, which is generally priced in dollars on the world market. But if it was labor and local communication costs and transportation costs and just things that are costed out in RMB, and if you devalued the currency, what that means is that the China manufacturers are going to get more RMB for their dollars. Once they export, they sell something in the dollars. They get paid in dollars. They're going to get more RMB than they would have before. And therefore, they're able to pass on discounts because their costs, essentially 70%, are in RMB. So they do, in fact, get a break.
Yeah, so Neil, if we devalue the dollar here in the United States substantially, do you think your workers will just sit around and let you pay them dollars that are exchangeable for less and less?
Well, in China, maybe not in the United States, because
wait, in China,
the workers have a much bigger voice here than they do in China. You know, they just go along with what Big Brother in Beijing tells them to go along with.
Well, I really reject that notion. Every time I go to China, all I see are American businesses there. The Chinese workers love American goods, and everything about these, they've been poor for so long, is about getting more and more of the world's plenty. So I think it's a real reach to pretend that the Chinese would just sit there and lie prostrate and allow their wages to be eviscerated. But let's talk about the bigger picture. Why is Netflix so competitive? Why did it go from being a DVD mail order company that was begging Blockbuster to buying it to the vanquisher of Blockbuster on the way to becoming the most important producer of film and TV content in the world? It was through constant investment. Investment is what makes you more productive, what makes you more competitive, not devaluing the currency. Okay, well, so what are investors doing when they invest? They're buying currency income streams in the future. Call them yuan, call them dollars. You devalue your currency, you drive away the very investment that makes you productive in the first place. So I reject this Trumpian notion that you can devalue your way to prosperity. If that were true, Mexico, Argentina, and Zimbabwe would be the most prosperous countries on earth, yet they're not, and we know why they're not. You can't.
But let me ask you this, John. Let me ask you this. We have about 45 seconds left on this thing. The perception, right or wrong, so we can debate this for a while, but we don't have the time. Right or wrong, when people saw that the Chinese were manipulating their currency, as we're discussing it right now, markets took a big hit. It took a real big hit because they saw that as a retaliatory action by China against us and anybody else who was outside of the Chinese market. What do you think about that? I mean, are we in effect paying for that as a result of global markets taking a hit because of perceptiveness, and maybe they're just not as hip as what you're telling us?
Well, no. China is doing what every country in the world does. The dollar factors into just about every global transaction that ever takes place. So it's economic suicide for a country to not have their currency at least explicitly or loosely pegged to the dollar. So the Chinese are doing what everyone else does, yet we're going after the Chinese for it. That's the first thing. But the second thing, if we're going to blame anyone in this scenario, let's blame the U.S. Treasury. Because we're the ones not maintaining a stable dollar such that currency is an issue. If we'd been doing what we should have been doing and what rich countries do, which is maintain the dollar's value throughout time, this would not be an issue. That's what we did in Bretton Woods. Okay, the dollar's 1/35th of an ounce of gold. The world was on a dollar standard. We're the problem, not the Chinese. The Chinese are doing what every country in the world does. You've got to have a fairly strict relationship with the dollar. If not, you're out of luck.
Very fascinating. Hey, John, it's always great to talk to you. John Tamny from FreedomWorks and the author of The End of Work. We got to get him back, talk about his book and many, many other things. John, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, we have Meridian Baldacci from the Heritage Foundation, and we're going to talk about more free stuff. This time, we're going to talk about socialized healthcare. You don't want to miss it.
Made in America.
sharply higher at the open, stocks continued to perform well over the course of the day Tuesday.
And I think that bodes well here over the next couple of years for having bigger demands coming to this country.
Now, more of Neal Asbury's Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, we're going to carry on talking about more free stuff, and this time, single-payer health care. Well, health care, free health care, subsidized health care for illegals, just health care for anybody who happens to show up. But isn't it fascinating, the irony of all ironies? It's the Democrats that are going to ultimately bring down Obamacare. Or at least they're the next ones to attempt. And the one thing that President Obama, their hero, I don't think he's such a hero anymore. They're really knocking this guy.
Not in the last few weeks, he's not.
The one thing that they could point to in 8 years that they delivered was Obamacare. And now the Democrats can't seem to throw it out the window fast enough, right?
Well, apparently, and I do find it amazing that they were complaining about it and trying to distance themselves, and yet not one Republican voted for Obamacare. 100% driven by the Democrats, bad deals cut by the Democrats with those in Congress to get their votes. I mean, the most underhanded, middle of the night, psst, have I got a deal for you? And some people actually got, paperwork for owning the Brooklyn Bridge. I thought that was unusual and a very clever way to pass it. So, yeah, we are living in a world right now. I find it astounding that, Bernie wants to give, well, he wants free puppy care for everybody, too. So I'm not against that. I think that's a good one. But it appears that we're debating this again. Pretty seriously, though.
Yeah. And I don't think they're going to give up on this. And it's just a non-winner. I mean, even the centrist Democrats, if you can call any more Democrats centrists, are saying this is such a bad idea. It's a loser. It's a losing proposition. 90% of Americans have health care that they're happy with.
Well, that's my whole point.
Let's just take it away.
Wait a minute. Let me see if I get this right, because I've been listening to this. For the last few weeks, I've been hearing, the Republicans are the party that wants to take away your health care for Americans. And yet, if we go the route that Bernie and, Elizabeth and half of them on the stage are talking about, I guess all of them, they all raise their hand. 180 million people will lose their plans right now, particularly ones coming through their employer. And then just to help the 20 million or so that, don't have health care.
Including all those union members.
Who's taking it away?
Union members.
All with those Cadillac plans.
And the union bosses who fought so hard for that. Isn't that another one of the irony of ironies? Hey, let's bring on Meridian Baldacci from the Heritage Foundation. And she's written so much about this. A great guest. She is the authority, and we're very pleased to have her on the show. Meridian, welcome to Made in America.
Thanks so much for having me. Glad to be on.
So tell us, in very simplistic terms, what is single-payer health care? What does that mean?
Yeah, so single payer refers to the fact that, right now there's multiple payers in our healthcare system. So you're probably paying into your healthcare, whether that's through your employer or individually. The government pays into programs like Medicaid and Medicare. Your employer may pay into a plan if you have employer-sponsored insurance. So we have all these different payers. Single payer says we're going to abolish all of that, which sounds good until you realize it means that you're abolishing all of those private plans that go with it. So you're outlawing all private coverage forms, whether that's your individual plan, your employer-sponsored plan. You're even getting rid of Medicaid. Medicare itself, as we know it, ironically, a lot of these plans are called Medicare for All, but it actually gets rid of Medicare as we know it and replaces everyone with a brand new government plan. Everyone gets one-size-fits-all health care. That's what single payer does.
Wow.
Well, it doesn't work for socks. We had this conversation earlier. Evidently, one size doesn't fit all.
Well, but they're why are all the Democrats jumping into this when the polling is very clear that this is a very, very major league losing issue, and their hero, I guess their hero of the past that kind of maybe forgot about, was the author of Obamacare. And, this is the thing that they won ostensibly. They won an election in the midterms based on supporting Obamacare. And it was the Republicans who came out the losers.
Well, you're right. Politically, it's a little confusing. There was a good moment in one of the debates where someone said, it used to be the Republicans who wanted repeal and replace, and now it's the Democrats. It's certainly confusing. The reality is, though, that Americans do have some real frustrations with the healthcare system. Even if the majority of Americans, especially those with employer-sponsored insurance, are happy with their insurance, there are some real frustrations. We're facing high costs, many of them caused by Obamacare. So in the individual market, costs doubled in just the first 3 years of Obamacare. You're looking at just incredibly high deductibles, narrow networks. In many cases, in the individual market at least, people don't have a choice of an insurer. So in the majority of counties across the United States, you have one insurer that you can take if you're on the individual market. That's not a choice of health care, and Americans are frustrated with that. What they don't realize, or at least are just beginning to realize, is that Medicare for All would make that worse. So it would make their taxes higher, and rather than saying you don't have, you only have one or two choices of an insurer, would say you don't have a choice. We're throwing everyone into the same government plan. That's what Americans are just beginning to realize, and that's the real error that Medicare for All makes.
Well, you know what I find amazing? I mean, the mantra, last time when they were passing it, a number of years ago, the mantra was you can keep your doctor, you can keep your plan, and we knew that turned out not to be correct, and it was a lie. I mean, 22 times the president said that. And then Gruber, the PhD from MIT, who is very much involved in writing it, said, well, basically, I'm paraphrasing, by the way, we counted on the stupidity of the American people to get this passed. So why would the American population buy into this concept? Trust us this time, Trust us this time, because this time we really mean that we're going to take care of you. It just seems a bit oxymoronic to me that they're going to believe it.
Well, it does, and we'll see whether the American public buys it. What we do know is that when Americans hear or asked the question, do you support Medicare for All? They say, yes, it sounds like a good idea. Medicare is a relatively popular program. People know their grandparents have Medicare. They like that idea. When you tell them, would you like Medicare for All if you knew it meant you would lose your current insurance? Would you like Medicare for All if it meant that you might not be able to keep your doctor? As soon as they realize that their current health care situation would go away under Medicare for All, the polls begin to change and people begin to turn away from Medicare for All. So I think what this really speaks to is there is a frustration, but people are looking for a real solution. Medicare for All isn't a real solution, and neither are these Medicare for All light plans. I think that's the real danger that we have to be aware of, is when people are talking about the public option or other variants of a public option, which would say, it's Medicare for All who want it, or it's, you can buy into Medicare. These are really concerning because they're a slower march to Medicare for All, and yet that's something that the public may not yet be as aware of. And so I think that's really the area to watch.
Hey, folks, we're talking to Meridian Baldacci from the Heritage Foundation, and we're talking about socialized health care. Very, very important topic. It's about your health care, and so many jobs also are at stake here. Very, very important topic. You don't want to miss it. She's going to stay with us. We're going to continue this conversation. There's a lot more to talk about.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman, and we're talking with Meridian Baldacci from the Heritage Foundation. She's an expert and has written very much about health care, and specifically about single-payer health care and the sort of pitfalls and the things that's out there that's making your health care be so expensive. I mean, if you look in the world, you look at what other countries are paying and what Americans are paying, not only for to see doctors and to have procedures done, but also for medicine. I mean, America's getting a raw deal. And so what are we going to do about it? It doesn't sound like single-payer health care is the answer. So, Meridian, what do the Republicans do now, right? Because a lot of the folks, the progressives, the liberals, are saying, well, the Republicans don't have any ideas. All they want to do is tear down. They want to take away all these things that are popular, pre-existing conditions, children staying on the parents' health care policies until they're 26. There's some parts of Obamacare Obamacare that the country decided that they liked. So what are the Republicans doing now that the Democrats seem to be veering off the cliff on this single payer option? Don't the Republicans have a big opportunity, but they don't have an option? They don't have a plan.
It's a huge opportunity, and the good news is there is a plan out there. Of course, we had the 2017 repeal and replace disaster, where Republicans all agreed that they wanted to repeal Obamacare, and no one could decide what the replacement was. So I think after that, conservatives really learned a lesson that they needed to come together and find the places of consensus and figure out what it was that Americans really wanted and needed in a good health care plan. The conclusion that a number of conservatives came to was that Americans are looking for more choice in their health care. They right now feel like they don't have much choice in their health care, whether that's in the individual market, where, as I mentioned before, you only have one or two choices of an insurer, or in places like Medicaid, where people are shoved into this program just based on their income level, and it delivers poor quality. It's consistently an underperforming program, and yet people can't really escape Medicaid either. They don't have any other kind of options. So people are frustrated with that. They want more choices. People also want lower costs. They're frustrated with that. At the same time, as you alluded to, they want to make sure that the sick are protected. So here's the good news. We've seen several states trying to make these steps just on a small level, but they've made modifications to their markets. And here's what they've seen. In Maryland, which is certainly a left-leaning state, they took some reforms on their market, and even there, overnight, they saw costs drop by 43% compared to what they would have been without these reforms. We saw that just the coverage stay level with that. People are having increased choices when states make these kinds of steps. So the lesson learned here from conservatives was, all right, we need a plan that's giving people more choices, that gives them lower costs, and that protects the sick. Thankfully, that has been developed. It's called the Healthcare Choices Proposal. There's over 100 leaders on it nationwide and counting. And I think that really has potential to be the next step for conservatives in the coming years.
Well, I have a question, and it relates to what we were discussing just a few moments ago, and that is, everyone says, all right, let's get on this single plan, a public option. Everyone's going to be part of it. Everyone goes through the same conduit, and we're going to get coverage for everybody. Well, coverage versus services are two different things. Even right now with Medicare, there are a lot of doctors that won't take Medicare. They just don't want to get involved in it, so they stay the way they are. There are a lot of concierge doctors out there. I think some of this gave rise, by the way, some of these rules, to concierge services. So I think when people understand that there is a vast gap between saying, I have a policy, here it is, here's my policy, I get these coverages, all right, I need a hip. Well, you're going to have to wait, sir, 6-7 months because there are, 22,000 people ahead of you that want to get that hip. So you can't do that. And by the way, the person who will help make that decision is someone that, I don't know, think of the Department of Motor Vehicle. Someone like that, a good bureaucrat who understands how to make these decisions. So, there's a lot of learning to do out there, a lot of education that needs to get out there to talk to these people so they understand this.
Well, you're exactly right. Coverage is not the same thing as care. You're alluding to the fact that in Canada, in Britain, where they have these single-payer systems, there's just incredibly long wait lists. So last year alone in Canada, there were people on wait lists for over 1 million procedures. And we're not talking about on wait lists for a few days or for even a couple of weeks. We're talking about wait lists for up to over a year, depending on what the procedure was. Just unacceptably long lengths of time. You have people in Britain who are waiting in the emergency room hallways on cots so that they can get care while ambulances drive around London with the people that can't fit in the hallways of the emergency rooms. That's on an unacceptable level of care, and yet that's what single payer delivers. Coverage is not the same thing as care, and that's why it's important that we ensure that Americans actually have the opportunity to access a wide variety of different coverage options that are going to meet their needs and provide the care that they need, whether that is through a direct contract with their doctor, whether that's through a better insurance plan, whether that's through health sharing ministries, or any other number of options. We need to be enlivening those options so that people are able to take advantage of them.
Hey, Meridian, thanks for being on the show. It's been wonderful. Time flew so quickly. We're talking with Meridian Baldacci from the Heritage Foundation. We want to get her back real soon. A lot more to talk about on this topic. Meridian, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, Dr. Rothman and I have some final thoughts for the day.
Made in America.
Welcome to Made in America. I'm your host, Neal Asbury, together with co-host Dr. Rich Rothman. So, Rich, I kind of touched on it earlier today, but I'd just like to get your opinion. I'd like to get your opinion on many things. But President Trump, this week, kind of very abruptly comes out. I don't think anybody really expected, and that's what he's so good at, is coming up with statements when nobody's expecting it.
You think?
But said, hey, look, I don't like the progress we're making with China. My guys just got back from Beijing. I don't like the way they were received. Didn't have the type of discussions that I thought they should have. We're now going to put a 10% tariff on everything that we buy from China, or in everything that's left. That doesn't
the
have
remaining number of billions.
300 billion.
Right.
And, oh, by the way, it's going to be in effect on September 1st, just a couple of weeks from now. Now, the USTR has to actually publish, what it is that they're going to put tariffs on. They got to put the codes and when actually it's going to be implemented, and we haven't seen that yet. But the president has never let us down yet, has he? Whenever he says something like this, it actually happens. And so we should believe that this is going to happen. So that means everything, all the consumer goods, everything that has not been tariffed because the president did not want, the American consumer to get hit. Hey, look, I just gave you this big tax break, but now I'm going to take it all back because, 50% of what you buy, those things that you need, to run your life has just gone up, to offset whatever that tax break is. Then China, of course, says, we're going to do our own thing here. We're going to make it much more difficult for American companies to do business here. We're going to devalue our currency, so your tariffs are meaningless. And oh, by the way, we want a free and fair deal that's of equals. They keep saying of equals. We want to be treated as an equal. President fires back and says, that means they just want a Democrat to get elected. They're just holding out for a Democrat. And so therefore, we're likely to have nothing, no deal put in place between now and the election. Meanwhile, the American farmer is getting hammered. I mean, absolutely getting hammered. It's the base of the president. A lot of the farm country voted for this president. And the president needs them next time around. I mean, this is a very, very complicated calculus that's going on between our two countries. I just don't know where this is going to end up.
Well, you made a very interesting point that, he tweets out and talks about what he's going to do. And one thing that I've seen in Mr. Trump since before, he's been the president, he does what he says. I mean, he puts it all out there. There's no subliminal meaning in what he's talking about. If he says he's going to do tariffs, he's going to do tariffs. But I think you have to understand the vision of this man. And the vision is different than these other politicians, these well-groomed, guys like Kerry, who's been around for a long time, and God knows what he accomplished except a hell of a chin. But the reality of it is that he's looking down the road. He's tired of America being taken advantage of. He says that. That's his comeback statement every time. We have been taken advantage of. We have been taken advantage of. They've billions of dollars, billions of, millions of jobs and political, all the stuff that's out there. And he's looking down the road. He believes, and I find it interesting, he said the other day that, I really don't see anything. I think the Chinese want to play it out anyway. I think they're listening to the Democrats and saying, you know what, Jesus, if the Democrats keep up this incredible, fantasy, Wizard of Oz campaign they're in, that he's a whatever. Now this week he's he's a killer. He's responsible. He's responsible for mass killings. He hates everybody. He wants to wipe out Hispanic. I mean, it's just outrageous. They're thinking that, maybe we'll just ride it out and we'll see if we can get somebody like Sleepy Joe. Oh, that's right, Joe Biden. We can get Joe Biden it or somebody else. And you know what? We know already. That's a tested answer. We know he's going to give us everything we want. So that's the reality.
But I think that's where the Chinese are making a very big mistake.
Big mistake.
Because, the Democrats will be so much in a corner on this that they cannot make a deal. Because, it would be Trump that's really taking the hard medicine, got the Chinese on the ropes, and the Democrats let them live to fight another day. And, the unions and the blue collar workers and the people that they are supposed to be representing, those folks that, for many decades that they have been the voice of, will never believe them. Will never believe them again. I mean, it's a very complicated situation. But unfortunately, we could have carried on with this for quite a long time and many, many, many other things that impact your jobs. However, Rich, we're out of time. I could see you being very disappointed.
I always am. This is a tremendous topic, and I'm looking forward to. In fact, I'm going to start the next show right now. Just saying.
Well, Rich, we can't start it now, but we're going to be back again next week at the same time for another adventure of Made in America, where we never stop fighting for your jobs.